why should you care about Node-RED? Because Node-RED is an easy way for FileMaker developers to integrate webhooks and microservices with FileMaker apps. This is an example of a simple hello world flow. To execute this flow, you can go to this web page right now. There's 3 nodes in this flow. The first tells the flow to listen for GET requests at api.ddb.space/sofa/hello. And the second is a change node, and here's how the configuration looks for that. The change node sets a new value to the payload of the message object. The message object is the JavaScript object that passes data from each node to the next. And then the last node returns the result to the client. And if you went to this URL, you would see this output. The blog posts on my website, which you can get to through this code, explain step-by-step how to configure a new Node-RED instance on AWS or any Ubuntu server. I do recommend using a dedicated server, and you can get a suitable instance on AWS for about $3 a month US, so why not? By the time you complete the tutorial, you'll have configured a firewall, configured fail to ban to thwart brute force attacks. You'll have a reverse proxy to expose Node-RED services on port 80 and 443. And you'll have an automatically renewing Let's Encrypt SSL certificate. So let's get into it. Oops. Share. Okay, so here's the blog post, and this one probably takes a little longer to go through. You'll probably spend at least 30 minutes going through the whole process, from spinning up the instance in AWS, which you can skip if you're using your own server, to installing and configuring Node-RED. But it's very detailed. It tells you every step, and you can't go wrong. Ban. Yep, there you go. So let's find my demo file. There we go. So this is the hello world example. So this is just a FileMaker file that's set up as it's like a postman basically. So I'm entering a URL, some optional curl, and a body to send, and then we're going to see our response down here. So over here, I'm going to open up Node-RED. This is the Node-RED editor. And so I'm right now in a tab called Sofa Demo, where I've created the simple hello world example. So let's just dig a little bit into each of these. This is a HTTP in node. So we find all of our nodes along the left column here. So if we were to rebuild this, we would drag in this, and then we would put in a URL, Sofa, and just call it hello2 so we don't conflict. And then we're going to use a change node here, and we'll look at the one that's already done. So I'm setting message.payload to this JSON object, which we want to send out. Payload is sort of like the body of the message. It's used for lots of things. And then lastly, we want to reply to the client with a HTTP response, and we don't need to do any configuration there. So these are identical. I'm just going to delete that and deploy again. And when I click send, we get the response down here, hello world. Now let's look at how we can debug this. So here's a node called a debug node. I can drag this on here. This is going to allow me to see what's actually happening when the request comes in. So I'm going to clear the debug log, send the request again, and you can see that, oh, empty. Yeah, so I debugged the message.payload, and we actually did not send any body. So in fact, it's just an empty object. I'm going to edit this so that it outputs the entire message object and deploy again and send the message again. So here is the whole message object. So payload is empty. And then we also get these objects called request and response. And so let's see, we get the headers that came from the client are in here. The method is in here, the URL. Parsed URL. That would be useful if we had a query string, I think. Params, this would also show query string parameters. These are all just slightly different ways of using the same thing. Body is empty, that's the same as payload. There's a lot of duplication. Cookies would be in here, etc. And then I'm going to close that and look in response. So these are things that are going to go back out. Response. Yeah, I guess, actually, sorry, I don't actually know how that works. But we will learn a little bit more about that in a second. So I can see the headers that we got back from Node-RED. Most importantly, it's a 200 OK. Maybe what we'll do next is we'll consider the fact that this is insecure right now, in the sense that anybody can execute this. And maybe some of you did while I was running the keynote. So let's imagine that we want to put authentication on this. And so you probably know, if you've done any integrations with APIs, that the way you might implement authentication in curl, if it's basic authentication, would be with -u and then a username. So let's just call it admin, and a password like super secure. So we'll send this now. And so I got the same response I always did. Node-RED simply ignored the authentication because we're not checking for that. But what I can do is I can see in message, I can look at the request headers, and I can see that we have an authorization header that contains basic, and then the base64 encoded version of the username :password. I could have computed this in FileMaker as well using the base64 function, but I can also just get it here. So now what we want to do is add a switch node. So we're going to take this off. We're going to route this into the switch node, and then we're going to check message.request.headers authorization, and we want to see if it's equal to that. And then we want to add an otherwise. So if this key is equal to this value, we're going to exit on connector 1. Otherwise, we exit on connector 2. So, and there they are, right there, 1 and 2. So this is now going to go under 1. And then down at 2, we always need to respond. Otherwise, the client's just going to get a timeout error. So we're going to do, actually, what we can do is just go directly to the HTTP response. I could put a body in, like I could put an error message in if I want, but the HTTP node allows us to set a status code to what's forbidden, 403, I think. So now if I deploy and I send, it worked. And hopefully it worked because I specified the correct username and password. If I didn't, I got 403 forbidden. And in this case, I got an empty object body response. So that is an example of how you can secure your functions. Now, I've actually built subflows to secure my APIs. So for example, I have this DDB API auth subflow. And in here, I can actually put the client ID that's allowed to access this service, or I can put a permission that the client must have in order to run the service. It all depends on whether the service is purpose-built for a single client or multiple clients. So what happens is each client has their own API key, a public key and a secret key, which is managed by FileMaker. And so when they run the call, that will be passed in, and then this subflow, which if I double click it, oh no, not if I double click it, if I double click here, I can see there's some a JavaScript function and a number of things that are happening here to authenticate the API key and to verify that the correct privileges are present. If everything passes, it goes out to output 1 and it continues the flow. Otherwise, we get that 403 response right here in the path. So don't worry about the details. It's just, I just wanted to show you that you can simplify things that you use frequently. It's almost like having a function or a script that you can call. So I'll delete that. So there's our hello world example. And so here's another example that I built for SOFA here. So let's just clear this. So this is at sofa/meetup. And I think I have that one here. Let's just clear that. And what this does is this performs an HTTP request to Meetup to get the SOFA meeting page for this Meetup. And then it parses that out. Let's see, set message upload. Oh yeah, I sort of forgot how this works. Oh, right, yeah, so this contains all of the attendees. And so then we're converting it to JSON, and then we're looking in a, it's actually a JSON object that's returned by that Meetup endpoint. And so we're returning an array of people, basically. And so this split node is, it's kind of like a loop. Basically, the message is flowing once through here, and then we're passing an array into split. And then everything between split and join runs once for every element in the array. Every element is an individual that confirmed attendance. So then we're checking for a yes response in this object. And if it's a no, we just set this object to not attending, and then I sort of skip some things using this this link node. You can see the dotted line that appears when I click it. Otherwise, we look for the individual's profile link, which is in that object, and then we make a new HTTP request to that, and then we parse that out to try to find the country name. So this is using a CSS selector. It's actually looking at our HTML profile and pulling out the country name. So then we join all these requests, and I have a function that counts the number of each country that we see, and then it returns that output. So if I click send, and any of you could go to this URL to run it as well, we can see, in fact, it's actually easier to read here because it's spaced out. We can see that we have attendees from Germany, Hong Kong, India, Taiwan, Costa Rica, Australia, United Kingdom, Japan, New Zealand, USA, and Canada. And
I'm not sure if you mentioned this is for tonight's meeting. So this is going out to the Meetup website and grabbing all this and displaying it now.
Yeah, so right now, every time somebody calls this, and actually it looks like a couple people have. Oh, there's another one. You can actually see briefly, it'll show requesting. So this is a thing that's requested once, and then this gets requested 60 times or 61, depending on how many people we have now. So it's loading a lot of data. But it's still very, very fast. What you could do, though, if you were actually publishing something like this, is probably what I would do is I would cache this data somewhere along with a timestamp. And then each time the API gets called, I would say, how old is the cache? Is it more than 5 minutes old? Okay, do it all again. Otherwise, just echo out the cache version. So we're not making thousands of requests to Meetup. They'd probably get banned by their load balancer. So yeah, scraping is very useful if you need to do something with something that doesn't have an API. I'm doing something right now for a land planning office. It's a government office in New Brunswick, or it's public sector anyway. And they need to load information from the land registry, which they don't manage. And there is no API available for that. So we can use a flow like this to basically use the website and return data electronically. So another example of,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of credentials did you need to do that? Is that just by virtue of being a member of Meetup? Did you sign up for Meetup API credentials?
No. Okay, I'll give you a bit of an idea of how I did that, because some websites are difficult to scrape, and I think maybe it sounds like you know that Meetup is difficult to scrape.
Well, I don't know if you're going through like an API backend that's giving you clean JSON data, or going, fishing through chaotic HTML code.
Yeah. So this page, if you loaded this URL with Postman, you do not get the users here. These are requested later with JavaScript. So that makes it quite difficult to scrape.
I see. Okay, so you're going through the front door, kind of, right?
Yeah, sort of. Well, I'm going to tell you. I mean, I couldn't. I'm telling you that I couldn't. So
okay, all right.
This is what I had to do. I had to go to, is it sources? And I'm not seeing what network, storage, graphics. This doesn't look like what I recall. I just sort of figure out how to do this, and oh, here we go. It's under network. So under XHR/fetch, if I refresh this now, I can see that there's a large file here called attendees, and here it is. So it's a JSON object that contains a whole bunch of information. Let's just search for attendees, because I think, oh, maybe not. But developers. Oh, here we go. Yeah, here's a person. So yeah, member. So this shows the name, bio, and the link to the profile. So I currently, I actually, let's see, how do you get the URL for this? I think I right-click it and then copy link. So that's the link that I use in the Node-RED. If I had more time and desire to figure it out, I would figure out how that URL works and be able to get it, say, from this URL, for example, or maybe an event number. I'm sure that's possible.
That's very cool.
I just don't know how difficult it is. And yeah, then I would use, the second thing was it's actually using the profiles. Where was one of those profiles? So here's a profile. And so in this case, now notice how it doesn't have the country here, but if you, actually I'll just inspect this. The country is in here. It's right here. So Node-RED has the ability to find this using a CSS selector. So I use, excuse me, .country-name in order to get the country names.
Cool.
So it looks like they used to have that on there in the most recent version. They've hidden it, but
Yeah.
the developer never removed the code because they know management's probably going to change their mind. So I wouldn't rely on that too much though, but it's great for the demo.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's
That's
the
a really
thing.
cool find.
If you're relying on scraping for your business, you have to know that it could change at any moment. It's usually an API is versioned. So if they're going to change it, they usually do a new version so as not to break implementations. And then if you want the new features, you have to upgrade to the new API version. But if it's just a website, they're not expecting people to be doing this. And sometimes they don't want people to do this. So it could change out from under you very easily. So scraping, very useful. Another thing that could be very useful is to run functions, so microservices, basically, to do things that aren't so easy to do in FileMaker. And so I am not experienced with regex, but it is one that sort of comes up from time to time. It is, you can't really do it in FileMaker. You could use a web viewer and the JavaScript functions to call the web viewer and get a response back. So that's one way, and that's perfectly fine. But here's another way. So here in the editor, I have set up an endpoint here, sofa/regex, and then there's a function here that that looks for these parameters that we're passing in the body, and then depending on the type, it runs a different JavaScript function and then sends the response back out. So let's just have a look at a few really, really simple examples. And if somebody really knows their regex and wants me to make something complicated, have at it. So here we're passing define database as our string. And then the pattern is database. So this is, we're not seeing any regex, it's just text in this case. We will get slightly more complicated in a moment. And for type, we're going to specify test. The options are test, exec, replace, and search. So for test, we're going to get a true or false answer. In this case, it's true because database was found in defined database. And if I got beach ball. If I got a spelling error there and I click send, we're going to get false. Okay, let's go to the next example. So this time we're using replace. Same example, but we're replacing database with fields. So when I run that, I get a response, and the answer is define fields. It says replace here. I couldn't say result or output or something. That's all in my function. Here's one where we're looking to see if the word color appears in a string, and we want to catch it, whether it's the American spelling or the British spelling. So we put in the regex symbol, the question mark, to say that, to indicate that this character is optional. So this will return true, and this will return, oops, this will return true as well. But if we spell it some other way, that would return false. So that's something that would be a little bit harder to do in FileMaker, perhaps. Not that hard, I guess. And then what's the, oh, I guess that's all the examples I did. So yeah, very, very simple. I don't have a lot of regex knowledge. Any thoughts or questions about regex or functions that you might run other than that?
What's this application, or is this a web app that you're using for Node-RED?
This?
No, what do you call this?
Node-RED.
I know. Okay, so is this a web app or is this a downloaded app?
What is it? It's a JavaScript library that you run on a web server on top of Node.js. So
Okay, so
API,
like, did you have to configure this yourself, or did you just log in to a service that has this?
yeah, so the instructions are in the blog here. So
Okay.
this starts with a brand new Ubuntu 20.04 instance, right? And then there's steps to install Node-RED, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, because I didn't follow what the original. I thought this was a service that you plug into, but you're saying it's a service you install in your own network.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really important point that I missed. This is a totally free open source product that you run yourself. And Charles, you're muted. If you're, or maybe you're talking to someone else. Yep. So I wanted to know if anybody has any ideas about other kinds of functions that you might want to run that are cumbersome or difficult to run in FileMaker.
Can you send in an email and have it pick apart the email?
Oh, what kind of picking apart?
So just to put context, we have a PHP. You know, once again, awesome presentation, 2 in a row. I'm comparing this with something that we're using here, which is a PHP app, into which we use it for. Hey, where'd Jason go? We use it for a couple purposes. One is we do the you know, you send in a URL and it fixes it. And the other thing that we do a lot is we send in an email from like a FileMaker server, and using some library, I think it's PHP mailer, I forget, some library or some clever code, it takes the email and it's able to read it and extract the subject line. And then, you know, it's PHP code, you know, old school. And then, you know, it reads the subject line and evaluates it against expected patterns in order to determine if it's a heartbeat, server heartbeat thing. That all said, this Node-RED, which looks like a you know, it's going from it would be going from PHP to JavaScript, and that's a sort of an interesting question. How would you compare this versus PHP? Obviously, the visual programming thing is massively useful.
Yeah, how would I compare it to PHP? I mean, it could do all the same things, really.
Asynchronous.
So I think you have to understand, you're comparing sort of like oranges to tangerines here, right? Node-RED is a drag and drop block node oriented, node not meaning Node.js, but node also the nodes that you're editing, oriented programming environment.
Yep.
PHP is a language that runs on a server, right? Node-RED runs on a server as well, but it runs on a Node.js server. So let's call that server the base, looking at the architecture of the server. Let's say hypothetically a Linux server. On top of that, you have an operating, you have Node.js running, and then you have this application running on top of that. Instead, the middle layer is replaced by PHP. So there's slightly different things and they have different purposes. But in terms of parsing out language, that's something you can do in any environment, really.
Yeah.
So,
right? I think the real takeaway that Jason's showing here is that he's showing how you can make your own API to return something that's maybe complex or something that you can't get access to within FileMaker.
So under the hood, what I'm seeing it, and obviously there's a visual programming environment that exists here, but not in the PHP that I'm comparing it to. I would imagine, and I could be wrong, I would imagine that the Node-RED, when you're, you know, moving the boxes around, connecting the lines, is generating code. It's basically rendering some sort of JavaScript code, right?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say it's rendering it. I would say that it's processing each block and doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions that you've asked that we need to go through. So one is how would you send and receive email and parse email? What you'd probably do is open up this manage palette and go to install and type the word email. there's dozens of collections of nodes that do this. And you could learn more about these on the Node-RED website. Actually, I can click here. So this is a collection to send and receive simple emails. And so here we have the output node. I guess this is for sending an email. So the message.payload is going to go in the body, and then you have all of these other points to set, these different characteristics. The input node, yeah. So here's where you see it's not clear. Actually, yeah, the message.header would contain the subject. So it's most likely going to be in message.header.subject. So I would expect that it would be really, really easy to pull out the subject.
Lots of libraries available.
Tons of libraries available. So yeah, you can do so much. As far as what code is being generated by Node-RED. So if I go here and I copy this, can't remember if I can just immediately paste that. I think maybe not, but let's just see. I can go to here and I can go to export. And so this shows the JSON representation of these nodes. So,
Cool.
I mean, we don't want to go into it in detail, but
no, I get it. It's just it generates the code,
Yeah, basically, it's this is code that would only execute in the context of the Node-RED runtime. It's obviously written in JavaScript, but it wouldn't really translate to another system. There's a lot of overhead that's specific to Node-RED.
This is the equivalent of taking an object in FileMaker and putting it in the clipboard and examining the XML version of that object.
Yep.
It's not the code. It's not FileMaker's script. It's the stuff it's the internal database store of this particular node, so you can copy and paste it.
Okay, and then there's a Node-RED runtime that's basically, very cool. Looks cool.
Yeah, now you also asked about server monitoring. So I can show you, I have a server monitor here that I've constructed. So it's a little crazy. I don't think I want to go through the entire thing, but basically from my FileMaker database, I have a list of servers that I'm monitoring, and that database contains information about, it'll contain an endpoint that I want to check and data that I expect to get back from it. And so I called it for each, actually, in this case, to remind me. This is a split node. We talked about this before. And so this iterates through each of the servers that I'm monitoring. It makes the HTTP request and checks for errors. This is actually a Twilio node that lets me know immediately if, let's see, which one is this? This, because I thought it was checking 3 times actually before it notified me. Maybe that's in here. Yeah, it's in here actually. So it actually, if it gets an error, it actually tries again in 5 seconds, and then and then again in another 5 seconds before it actually lets me know.
And are your servers sending outgoing messages? You have like an agent local to the FileMaker server install?
No, not that's not how I'm doing it right now. So this is reaching out every minute to all the servers I'm monitoring, and then this is a FileMaker node. This is a new record node. If I scroll down here, so here's all of the FileMaker data API nodes, and so this writes a record to FileMaker to have a log of that status. Another thing, though, that you mentioned emails somewhere. Here I have it. So I'm just experimenting with this right now. I don't love it because it's not secure in the sense that somebody else could send. and now we're recording this and it's going to go on the internet. Somebody could send data to my Node-RED via SMTP on port 1025. I do have a function here that oh, there, I need to change that now.
Yep.
That just drops things that don't have a specific destination email. But basically, in my FileMaker admin console, I just set the SMTP server to api.ddb.space, and I forget if it's the to or from address, doesn't matter, they can both be anything, but I basically put a big string of random numbers in one of those that I'm checking for. And then I guess at the bottom here, it's checking for, oh, it's not really doing any checking. It's doing a little bit of parsing, but basically any email that comes from FileMaker server right now is getting sent to my SMS, and it's sending the server and the topic, which I pulled from, I guess that's the subject line. Yeah, that's the subject line of the email. So yeah, just something I'm going to delete this after the call, so I don't start getting FMS error messages from all of you.
Very cool.
That's super nifty. And
there's
is
one
it
more.
possible you could show us an operation?
Show you what?
Do you have like an interface for that, or?
Oh, for like updating the.
Yeah, like how do you like? So once the server's gone offline or AWOL or asleep, you're notified. But how do you add a new server and so on?
Oh, okay, yeah. So let's see. I just started doing this. So here's my AWS tab. So here's a bunch of AWS APIs. I could run these directly from FileMaker. This is kind of unnecessary. I don't know which way is the best way to go, but I ended up building it in Node-RED. A lot of the complexities here, and then these are just really simple API calls that I can make. I can structure them how I want from FileMaker. So I have the ability to launch a new instance, for example. So this launches a new instance. From FileMaker, I would pass in the instance type that I want, the hard drive size, things like that. Whether it's FMS or not, there's a number of criteria that would determine security group settings, like what ports are we allowed to connect to this server. And then it creates the server, and it's ready in a few seconds. And I can run something else to install, actually use Ansible, a totally different service, to install FileMaker server and configure the server in other ways. It also does the DNS. So as soon as that server is up, I can run this call to update the DNS in Route 53, so that whatever client name.ddb.space goes directly to that server. I can start and stop instances. So yeah, this is new. I'm sort of experimenting, but yeah, it's pretty cool. Much easier than stepping through Amazon every time and making sure you get every setting right. Yeah, it's awesome. There was one other big thing that I wanted to show, and that is webhooks.
Just before, I think there's Ben who had a question or comment.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Jason. Brilliant. Oh, brilliant. Really enjoying this presentation. I was going to ask about the AWS tab, so you've done that now, great. But the other thing I was interested, maybe detailed, using Node-RED to write to FileMaker to create, edit records.
Okay, yeah, we're going to do that right now.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so let's do that. So back to SOFA demo. This is something that's probably the main thing a lot of you are going to want to do with Node-RED. And I noticed actually, maybe let's just have a look at the chat. Somebody mentioned S3 for container alternative and Node-RED for Claris Connect alternative. Yeah, Node-RED can do anything that Claris Connect could do. I'm not saying it's better, but it is free. So, and it is limitless. Like, you can do anything with it.
Does anybody in the group, maybe a show of hands, use Claris Connect?
Yeah, I've been using it, Charles, and I even did a little presentation on the AWS S3 connector, but really just kind of out of interest. And yeah.
Super interesting. We should have asked that question when a little earlier in the night, but that's really interesting that only one person out of all of these people kind of uses it.
Yeah.
There's a really nice meetup group for Claris Connect, if anyone's interested, run by the Portage Bay people, if people want to know more about it, by the way.
Yeah, cool. And feel free to post that link in the chat.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, webhooks is one of the #1 things you're going to want to do with Node-RED. So this little sample file that I've created here, maybe what I'll do is make a new window and go to webhook log and just delete all these. Okay, so there's many different ways to do this. I'm going to show you the way that I've done it and I like to do it. So you would set up, actually, let's look at an example of a bunch of webhooks. So this tab has a whole bunch of webhooks on it. Webhook for Mailjet, and then a bunch of Twilio webhooks. So incoming SMS message, incoming voice call status change, sent SMS message. And then Zoom Rails, I'm not using this right now, but this is a payment gateway service. And that's all I have there. Maybe I should explain webhooks. Some of us probably don't know. Let's say you're using an email API to send emails. You might want to know when the email has been successfully sent. You might want to know if it bounced. You might want to know when it was opened or when the user clicked something in it. So often these services keep this information for a period of time so that you can make an outgoing call to request that update. But a webhook is the reverse. It's coming in from the service as the event happens. And this doesn't really work with FileMaker unless you have something in the middle to translate the webhook into something that the data API understands. So you can do this with PHP. That's how I used to do it. A lot of us have PHP running on our servers, or used to. But I'm not doing that anymore anyway. And this is a really easy way to do that. So this is a sample webhook for a fictional service that doesn't, let's just call it the SOFA webhook. And so it's got an HTTP node at an endpoint. And this time we're looking for post requests coming in. And then I have something called a change node, which is, it's just moving the data around to make it fit the data API. So usually when a webhook comes in, the webhook is just going to be in the body of the message. And so that's message.payload. And but when we send a request to the data API, it's going to be looking for an actual payload key, and then the actual payload is going to be in that. So we're going to set, in this case, we're going to put the object that we're going to send to data API in FM payload. And so we're setting that to a JSON object, which includes the payload key and then the object. And then we're also going to pass a scripts array, which is just array name and the name of the script. Very simple. So there is a, let's see, there is a node here to just call a script. But this is kind of annoying because you can't send in a lot of data because it uses the GET request. So you can't post a large JSON object to it. I think that would be nice if you could and pass it in through the script parameter. But the best way is just to create record and then have it run a script after. And so that's what this is for. So then we run this FileMaker create record node. So this is where you select a client. So if I click edit here, see, this is where I configure the server, the database name, and the username and password. And I could create a new one there, add new DAPI client right there if I wanted to. Specify the layout name. We're going to reference FM payload, what we just set for the data, and then message scripts, which we also just set. And then the output, we want to come back into payload, although I don't think we're expecting anything to come back. And then we want to set a status code for the provider that's sending us this webhook, because we want them to retry if there's been any kind of error. So if we get a payload, if we get something in payload.script error other than 0, we want to set the message.status code to 500. That would mean that I can't remember what conditions would cause that, if maybe the FileMaker server is unreachable. Yeah, probably. And then otherwise, we're going to look for the script result that came back from the script. That should include a status code. And I'll show you that script in a moment, because there could be an error that happens in FileMaker unrelated to the data API, like a record locking error or something like that. So we might want to also send a 503, a 500, or a 500 means server error, 503 means try again later. In practice, any 500 code, they're probably just going to, or anything other than a 200, I would imagine they're going to try again later. And then I clear the payload out, otherwise it's just going to echo out the body that came in. I don't want to send that back to the provider, so I'm just sending an empty body back. And then this is the HTTP response node. So if I go to my little sort of Postman thing here and delete this, I want to send, say I'm the provider and I want to send this object to this endpoint that I've provided to the provider. Click send, and I got 200 OK, which means that there probably is a record here, and here it is. This is the record that just got created through the web service. So now let's have a look at how this is set up in FileMaker. So one thing I have is a table called webhook log. There's a little bit of metadata here. There's the payload. So this is the information that came from the provider, the script that we ran after we got this data, and the result that we're passing back out. So very simple. And all of our webhooks from all of our providers can go into this one table. It creates a new record every time. And that also means that we can avoid, actually, no, forget it. I'm gonna backtrack on that. And then let's also briefly look at how we set up accounts and things. So I have a Node-RED account that belongs to the Node-RED privilege set. And the password is just something long and random that nobody would ever guess, and not stored anywhere. And then the privilege set is very limited. So we have the ability to create records in that table, and we don't need any other privileges. We don't even need edit privileges, because you can edit when you create. And then for layouts, we just need that one webhook log layout. And for scripts, we need to, we're going to create one script for every webhook, and we're going to allow those to execute. And that is it. And then you only extend privileges is the FM REST extended privilege. So that's that. And then let's look at the scripts. So this is sample webhook. Okay, so I'm using a single pass loop here. So if you don't know what that is, you can just ignore it. And then at the top here, I'm setting a default result status code 200. That means everything went okay. So unless something changes, that's what's going to be output. So then we check for valid webhook data. So we set a variable to webhook log payload. So because it's a create record API, a data API call, this script will run in the context of that layout. So the data should be there in payload. We're making sure it's valid JSON. If it's not, we're sending back a 500 error. So I've just made a note here to myself that normally you would use 503 to tell the service that the error is on our side and they should try later. And 500 means something's broken, somebody needs to fix something. And then down here, oh, and then basically this area, do your thing. This is when you would do whatever you want to do with that webhook data. So you might, if it's a bounced email, for example, you might want to perform a find for the record that represents that email and update the status, send a notification to somebody, whatever it is you want to do. Now you need to have this script granted full access privileges. And so that will allow it to do any of those tasks. Since we gave very limited privileges for the data API to do directly. And so now we're going to package up that status code into a JSON object. We're going back to the webhook log. This is just in case you navigated away from it up here. And then we're going to set the current script name to the script field that I mentioned earlier, just so we have this history, and the result to the result. This is just for our information. It's not essential. In fact, we could even delete this record immediately if we didn't want to have the log. And then we commit and we exit with the result passed. So that result is what Node-RED is then going to use to determine the status code. So there you have it. Any questions?
Have you ever experimented with any throughput or load testing?
No, I have not. Yeah, do you have
more than you'll need?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's high. I would expect it to be pretty high.
Yeah. You can. I've found the average FileMaker server on a T2 medium server is like 300-400 calls a second. It can handle, and then it's later if you get too high, it starts to cack a bit. But that's like I don't know what you're running that's hitting it that hard.
Yeah, and then the key thing is that if FileMaker drops the connection or something like that, the provider is going to get back that bad response code, and it's going to know to retry later. So you shouldn't lose any data because of that. Also, most of your providers should be rate limiting their webhooks. They're actually, some of them have options where you can aggregate webhooks. So if there's there's 1 second where they have to send you 5 things, they might package it up into one request in that second rather than sending 5 requests in that second. That's sometimes
you can have node rate limit as well and throttle your stuff.
Yeah, like you could do it in, yeah, exactly. So that's the other thing is there's 2 servers involved here, Node and FileMaker. By the way, like I mentioned, you only have to spend about $3 a month for this this Node server, which is a I think it's a nano. I think I'm using a micro, which is a little more powerful than a nano. It has a full gigabyte of memory, but I never see the processor go above like 2%. So so far, I am nowhere close to reaching any kind of limitations. But definitely FileMaker would be the one. So that's a good point. Yeah, you could set up Node-RED to have a bit of a queue to group requests, and then pass them to FileMaker, every 10 seconds. Anything that's accumulated within 10 seconds gets all packaged up to FileMaker in one array.
That's what my experience has been. I'm using Auto and their webhook engine to receive webhooks from, I think it was MailChimp or something like that. And we have like 30,000 records in the log right now with the payload. And sometimes the payload is just one object. Other times the payload could be 4 or 5 objects. And then we just have to parse that and process.
That's cool. I like that. Yeah, so Node-RED, the way you would do that, the message object travels through the flow and then it's gone. But there is something called context variables. So let's see, flow. So here's a global variable that has, I don't really want to dig into it because I don't remember what this is and if I want to display it on screen actually. But yeah, basically you'd probably do a flow variable to just add these objects into an array. And then you would have a different flow that checks that every 10 seconds or whatever you want. And if there is anything, then it runs the FileMaker call. You would not be able to send the provider a 503 or a 500 error from FileMaker though, in that case. It would be too late because Node-RED would have already accepted the message. So you would have to, if FileMaker then rejects it, then you'd probably want to have some additional queue in Node-RED for that to be retried later. So it adds a little bit of complexity, but totally doable. And I don't think I have anything else to show. So if there's any more questions, let me know.
Jason, have you played with any other databases like Mongo or anything with Node?
Yeah, yeah. So I've done some experimenting with better forms. I was just trying to see what would be involved in taking FileMaker out of the picture of FM better forms and doing all the logic in Node-RED and then referring to another database. And I haven't done much, but I have, I do connect to a MongoDB database for my log, but I haven't actually tried doing anything. And I'm definitely not anywhere close to being an expert or even barely proficient in MongoDB. I might also try doing a SQL database, which I would be way more comfortable with. That would be cool too. There's probably a whole bunch of useful things that you could do with by having access to a database like that. And FileMaker.
I think for the thing that you mentioned earlier about queuing up messages and acting as a buffer for various things, especially logs and that kind of stuff, where you potentially could be getting.
Yeah, that's true. And I've seen there's a whole bunch of good Node-RED YouTubes, FileMaker Node-RED YouTubes. One I saw recently, actually, I think FM Bug, like just a week ago, had someone on showing how they use Node-RED to read the FileMaker logs. So they have a Node-RED instance on the FileMaker server. There's a node here called tail. Okay, so tail allows you to reference a file path, and anytime the computer writes to that file, it creates a it starts a flow basically, and so you could then call another Node-RED server, FileMaker data API to write it, or another database, because yeah, that could be a lot of data. You might not want that in FileMaker. So yeah, if you're collecting a ton of data, yeah, you might want to put that in SQL instead for sure. You can execute shell scripts on here.
Can it reach out to an FTP server and get data off FTP?
I don't know, but I know, yes. Yeah, again, like if I go to the manage palette here and type FTP, oops, I go to install and type FTP. So here's a whole bunch here. A Node-RED node to FTP client, a Node-RED node to FTP client, a Node-RED node to FTP server, a Node-RED node for FTP downloading. So yeah, there's lots of options. I'm kind of surprised there's not one as a standard. Yeah, what else can you do? It does WebSockets. The parsing stuff is really, really useful. I sort of talked about it a little earlier with the HTML node and how it allows you to use a CSS selector to pull out HTML or text content from that point, or etc. And then it can pass a single message, or it can sort of split it up like the loops I showed earlier. There's a XML node which can parse XML, YAML, CSV.
And so you could just, you said you had grep or regular expressions, and you could also do like awk or something like that.
Yeah, so regular expressions, that was just a basic standard JavaScript function. Like that's not a node. There might be a node for that too. Another thing that I was thinking could be useful, because dates are such a pain in FileMaker, it might be useful to have some kind of date API that uses common JavaScript date functions to do time zone conversion and all kinds of stuff like that. I haven't attempted that, but that could be another thing that would be interesting. I guess there could even be nodes that are specifically for that, but also, you know, because there's the function node, you know, this can just execute any JavaScript, right? And you can even, if you want
Moment.js, sorry to cut you. Moment.js is a node. There's a moment node that you can use for all time conversions.
Yeah. So configuration. Oh, oops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted manage palette install. I'm just curious. Yeah, there we go.
Sure.
So there's a Node-RED module also that uses Moment.
When you're searching for these things like the moment and the FTP you searched earlier, is that pointing towards a repository, or is that pointing to modules that are local to the install?
Yeah, no, those are that's pointing at here. Let's go to node-red.org and then click on flows. So there's thousands of
and then do we think, are these vetted? Do we think there's any security risk of installing code from the internet?
Yep. Yes, there is a security risk, and it may or may not be vetted. It's really this. These are all. If you click this, you're going to find. You're going to be able to go to this on GitHub. So it's the same as or npm as well. So it's really the same as any node open source library. You can see, you know, you can get an idea of how many people are using it and how often it's being updated and how well it's documented and all of these things, but there's always going to be a risk.
And of course, you could always read the source code for everything you're using.
Yep.
Just
you
kidding.
could.
Just kidding.
And yeah, and then most of these have automated testing, I think, that looks for common issues. Storage, so you can write and read files on the computer's hard drive. I mentioned tail. I got these MongoDB functions. You could also get SQL functions, I'm sure. Here's all the AWS things. So these are things that I've added at this point. The AWS and
Do you run Python in here?
Sorry?
Do you run Python?
What about Python?
Can you run Python scripts in here?
Probably.
I just found a Python function library, so.
Python. Yeah, Node-RED contrib Python function. Define a function with Python instead of JavaScript. Define a function. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you want. I mean, can JavaScript normally, can like Node.js just execute Python normally?
I think what that library does is the equivalent of like an eval of a function, that kind of an idea.
This quick hacked node will let you write functions using Python instead of JavaScript. 294 downloads in the last week, 5 stars. Updated 2 years ago, so I don't know. Oh, here's the Twilio stuff. So you can use all of these nodes to make like a interactive voice response or something like that. So the let's see, where is oh, gather. Yeah, gather would be, so you would say press 1 for this, press 2 for this, press 3 for this, and then you would use gather to wait for the user response. And then you would use like a switch node, I guess, to check for what the response is. And then you could say something else or start a recording, all of these things. So there's all these crazy things you can do with Twilio.
Jason, where do you get the FileMaker nodes? If you mentioned it earlier, I missed it. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's in the blog post, but basically it's just go to the manage palette, go to install FileMaker. Oh, sorry, it's called Node-RED contrib FileMaker. This was created by Louis. Louis works for Claris now for Apple, so he's not allowed to maintain it. So yeah, that's maybe a small issue, but it works.
Did Louis hand it over to anyone?
No, I don't think any. I'm sure he would be happy to, but.
And he did Dig FM present, I believe, a year ago, 2, maybe 3.
Oh yeah, and he's done DEF CON presentations on Node-RED as well. Actually, you can find them on YouTube.
So are those are they kind of like open once you've got the node there? Can you kind of rewrite them or copy them? Does that make sense?
I do not know how to create your own nodes, but there is documentation on let's see, creating nodes right here. So yeah, if you have some JavaScript experience, I'm sure you could learn to do it. They are all open source. You could fork the repository and make whatever changes you want.
Yeah, it's only because he's not maintaining it anymore. So it's just
yeah.
Interesting. And another quick question. Sorry if I missed this as well. Can you just like run like a terminal command from Node-RED and then get a response? Because you're running on a Linux server, so you should be able to run any Linux command, right?
Yeah. So here's exec runs a system command and returns its output. And there's 3 outputs here: standard out, standard error, and return code. By the way, most nodes are documented, so you click here with it selected and you can read all about it right here. So it's outputs the return code. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what that is, but
You can see I'm going to be busy for
for
the rest of the
example,
year.
sorry?
I see I'm going to be busy for the rest of the year learning this stuff.
Cool. I'm not sure what this one calls out to a long-running system command. Sends message to message.payload to standard in of the process. So I guess that allows you to get continuous updates of a long-running.
Yeah, daemons. You have daemons like running on a Linux server, so I guess you can talk to the daemons,
Right?
or get there,
Gotcha.
find out what the daemons are up to. That's interesting.
Yeah. And you could run a website on this too. I mean, it's more for actually the main most common use for Node-RED is IoT stuff. A lot of the people in the forums are into like home automation stuff and things like that, and other sorts of IoT, robotics, things like that. It's very commonly run on Raspberry Pis.
So you can have it
you
running
can
in a
also
web viewer.
run. Sorry.
So I guess you can have it running in a web viewer, kind of in a
Yeah.
FileMaker web viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can output HTML and CSS and JavaScript to just like any web server if you wanted to. In fact, there is let's see. Here's the dashboard. Okay, I thought there was a section called dashboard. I'm not seeing it. Node-RED can produce. Can produce a website basically that that you create with nodes that has buttons and switches and things basically to control the rest of your Node-RED. So like in the example I used earlier for robotics or something like that, you can very easily create it's not meant to be a public website. It's meant to be, I don't think it's meant to have multiple users, but yeah, you can create sort of an interesting web UI to execute flows, basically. Yeah, I must have run that on another instance, but if you just go to Manage Palette and search for, dashboard, Node-RED dashboard, I think. This is the official Node-RED dashboard. So here's an example of the kind of user interface you could create with that. Actually, I was kind of thinking about trying to make that Meetup country list a pie chart. And I could probably have done that with this very easily. Yeah, here's the nodes. Gauge, chart, toast notifications, forms, text input, etc. Pretty cool, huh?
Very cool. It's dangerous now. I have a lot of ideas.
Good.
Me too. It's brilliant. Thank you, Jason. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Okay, I'll stop sharing then.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jason. It was really good.
Yeah, thanks all for coming. I'll probably stick around for a bit to see anybody wants to chat about FileMaker.
Thank you so much, Jason. Really excellent. So much interesting stuff here. Like enough stuff here to really spend a lot of billable hours on unbillable learning rather than working. So,
Well, I've done most of the work for you, so.